So sometimes when you look at political science, you have to ask yourself, how is it possible that one discipline can have so many different ways of explaining? So what I would like to do here is, as we set out to focus and explore these different ways of explaining, is give you a little bit of a background as to what contributes to this seeming proliferation of types of explanations. And there are three particular factors that I wanted to review, since we already talked about them earlier in the semester. The first one is the limited relevance of the experimental method in the social sciences. The second one are the large number of explanations that we encounter. And third are some of these long-standing ontological divides that make it difficult to agree on what constitutes a good argument. So let me just review them. You may recall this little diagram describing the scientific method that sort of centers on experiments. And we had talked about that this experimental method really does not work as well in the social world as it does in the natural world, because in part many of the social phenomena, have a greater degree of complexity by virtue of the fact that they vary by culture, by time, by place, and so forth. And because of this sort of complexity, the experimental method has limited relevance to studying political phenomena. And so as a result, we see a proliferation of different types of explanations. This is the diagram from Abbott that we had talked about earlier in the semester that tries to sort of typologize the different types of explanations. Remember, he describes three different types of explanations. There are semantic ones. These are essentially largely descriptive. Ethnography, sort of pattern seeking belong in these categories. They have the function, just like in semantics, in trying to figure things out. What do things mean? And how does that meaning vary by context? So just like in language, semantics deals with the meaning of the word, here in the social sciences, these type of explanations focus on the meaning of particular event. Then you have the syntactic program. That is, it involves itself, just like syntax focuses on structures and the rules of explaining. So we have a wide variety of different explanations in the social sciences that try to explain and come up with theories. And then finally, there's the pragmatic approach. This doesn't really concern itself with how exactly something works or why it works, but how well it works. So this would be sort of the goal of experiments and the statistical methods. So this is just to give you an idea or remind you of this wide range of explanations that we encounter in the social sciences. And so that sometimes makes it difficult to sort of figure out, well, what the heck am I supposed to do? How do I choose among these plethora of different explanations? And then the third challenge to explaining are these deep-seated ontological divides that we find in the social sciences. Now, you may recall that some people sort of think that the social world works like a clock. It works essentially the same way the natural world works. And those people who subscribe to this clock-like ontology have a very distinct hierarchy of explanations in terms of their quality. They rank explanations being of high quality that involve experiments, big data, statistical analysis, or computer simulations. That is, these are the same types of explanations that are used in physics and in the natural world. And those are the ones to aspire to. Whereas the case study method or history or description and ethnography are explanations that are deemed to be of a low quality, and they are sometimes disparagingly referred to as barefoot empiricism. At the other end of the spectrum here is you have people who think that the world works like a clock or even like a text, that the social world is very, very complex, fundamentally different from the natural world, And so as a result, we need different types of explanations. And those are description, ethnography, history, case studies. And those are the explanations that are deemed to be of high quality, whereas the ones over here are deemed to be of low quality, and they're disparagingly referred to as scientism. And so what makes these ontological divides so frustrating is they're sort of embedded in the arguments. They're never sort of stated up front and make it very difficult to agree among these different camps as to what constitutes a good explanation. Now, one way in which social scientists sort of cut through all this complexity and obstacles towards explaining is by talking about research designs. The idea of research design is essentially you differentiate the type of explanations in terms of how they select evidence. And you differentiate along two dimensions: how much attention they pay in terms of the temporal variation of the evidence. Do they treat the evidence as static, as being the same across all different points in time, or do they treat evidence as a series of sort of snapshots, sequence of snapshots that vary across time? And the other type of variation is how many cases do you select, and how do these cases vary across space? Do you have a single case? And if you have a single case, do you focus just at the national level or at within case variation? Within case variations, for example, would be focusing not just on the United States, not just on Congress, but also looking at state legislatures. Or you focus on several cases. That's usually sort of in the order of between 2 and 10. And here again, you can focus either just on cases or also within case variation, and the same thing is for many cases. And this gives us then essentially two broad categories of explanations or research designs. The gray boxes here, these are referred to as case study research designs, and the white boxes down below here, those would be large and statistical research designs. And we will talk about these research designs in quite a bit more detail in the weeks to come. But what I wanted to point out to you is that these research designs share in common an underlying logic of hypothesis testing. And we will cover that in a separate short lecture. You can map these different research designs here onto Abbott's sort of typology. So what you have here in this corner is essentially research designs that focus on single cases. And the goal of these single case studies is to explore background factors, background conditions of existing explanations. That is, they want to be exploratory, find out what happened, and particularly find out things that happen that existing explanations have not yet focused on, that they have backgrounded them. This corner here, the syntactic program, is usually associated with several cases. And the goal here is to develop broader explanations theories. That is, you want to learn from those single case studies the things that they foregrounded and then incorporate them within existing explanations and theories and refine or amend them. And then finally down here in this corner, you have the large and statistical case studies. And their primary focus is then to test these theories and see how strong the causal variation is between the various stipulated causes and effects.